When you think about it, America is the richest, most powerful country in history. But here's the crazy part. Its rise to the top, it was anything but guaranteed. In fact, it was wildly unexpected. So let's dive right into this incredible story of how a basically forgotten continent became the world's #1 superpower.
And this really is the question we have to start with. After Europeans first stumbled upon it, North America was pretty much ignored for over 100 years. So you gotta ask, why? Why would anyone just, overlook an entire continent that's just brimming with potential?
And that brings us to the first part of our story. We're talking about the early days when this huge landmass was seen as, and believe me this is true, kind of useless.
Yeah, it all kicked off with a massive misunderstanding. See, Columbus, he was convinced he'd found a shortcut to Asia, for the whole spice trade thing. Well, he hadn't. But what he did find totally set the agenda for the next century. He went back to the king and queen of Spain and basically said, hey, no spices yet, but there's gold. Lots of it. And that was it. That's all they needed to hear. The mission became crystal clear. Get the gold.
So what happened next is pretty wild. Spain and Portugal, they literally drew a line on a map and divvied up the entire non-Christian world between them. And as luck would have it, all the action, we're talking huge empires like the Aztecs and the Incas and all that gold and silver, it was all in Central and South America. So naturally, that's where Spain poured all its energy. North America, by comparison, it just looked empty. Not many resources, not really worth the effort.
Okay, so fast forward about 100 years. After being on the back burner for so long, other European powers were looking at you, Britain and France. They finally start showing up and planting flags. And this right here sets the stage for a huge showdown over who gets to control the continent.
Now get a load of these numbers, because this is where it gets really interesting. By 1754, when France and Britain finally go to war over this thing, the British colonies had this insane population advantage. We're talking over 1 million people versus just 60,000 in New France. I mean, with a difference that huge, the outcome was almost a foregone conclusion,
Britain
right?
wins. They get Canada, all the land east of the Mississippi, the whole shebang. But victory came at a price, a huge price. To pay off its massive war debt, London looks across the Atlantic and decides the American colonies should help foot the bill. And this is just a perfect example of how winning a war can, ironically, lead you losing an empire. These new taxes, without any colonial voice in Parliament, by the way, that's what lit the fuse for the revolution.
And from that point on, man, things just moved at lightning speed. 1776, they declare independence. By 1781, with a ton of help from France, we should add, they pull off a shocking victory against the biggest superpower on the planet. But here's the thing, winning the war, that turned out to be the easy part. The real challenge was just getting started. Now, they had to actually build a country from scratch.
And let me tell you, their first crack at a government was a total disaster. It was called the Articles of Confederation, and basically, the 13 states were acting like 13 little independent countries. The central government they created was designed to be super weak. It couldn't even collect taxes or raise an army. The whole experiment was failing fast. So the founders had to go back to the drawing board. They wrote a brand new constitution, one that created a strong federal government, and in 1789, George Washington became the very first president of the United States.
Okay, so now they've got a government that actually works. And the young country is just on the verge of this period of absolutely explosive growth. We're talking an expansion that's going to stretch its borders clear across the continent.
And it all kicks off with another total surprise. Napoleon Bonaparte had just gotten the massive Louisiana territory back from Spain. But his big dreams of a new world empire, they got completely crushed by a slave revolt in Haiti. So now his focus is 100% on conquering Europe. He needs cash for his wars, and he really doesn't want the Americans teaming up with his arch-enemy, Britain. So what's his solution? Just sell him the whole thing.
And get this, for a piece of land that would eventually become 15 future states, the price tag was a measly $15 million. It was, without a doubt, one of the greatest real estate deals in all of history. And just like that, boom! With the stroke of a pen, the United States literally doubled in size overnight. This just blew open a vast frontier for a population that was already growing at a jaw-dropping rate. But the shopping spree didn't stop there. Nope, Florida purchased from Spain. Texas annexed. They made a deal with Britain to settle the Oregon border. And then, after a war with Mexico, the US gets this huge chunk of land that is now California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona. I mean, in the span of just 50 years, the nation went from the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific, from sea to shining sea. But all this rapid expansion was hiding a really deep, really dark problem. A problem that was tearing the country apart from the inside out. The nation was heading for its greatest test yet.
And it all came down to this one fundamental divide. In the North, which was industrializing, slavery was increasingly seen as a profound moral evil. But in the agricultural South, it was the absolute bedrock of their entire economy. You see the problem? There was just no middle ground here.
The final breaking point came in 1860. Abraham Lincoln gets elected president, and he ran on a platform of stopping slavery from expanding into the new territories. The southern states saw this as a direct attack on their entire way of life. And so, one by one, they started to secede from the Union. The Civil War had begun.
It was a brutal, bloody 4 years. Hundreds of thousands of people died. But in the end, the war was over. The North won. The United States was, by force, put back together, and 4 million enslaved people were finally free.
But here's something kind of wild. Just 2 years after the end of this absolutely devastating war, the country is still trying to heal. The US is right back to its old habits. It goes out and buys Alaska from Russia for the bargain price of $7.2 million. The idea of manifest destiny was clearly alive and well.
And that brings us to our final chapter. In the decades that followed the Civil War, America went through this just staggering transformation. You've got an industrial boom, railroads crisscrossing the country, waves of immigrants pouring in. It becomes an absolute economic powerhouse. So, with the continent now secure and its biggest internal conflict settled, America starts to look outward. It's ready to project its new power onto the world stage.
The big turning point was the Spanish-American War in 1898. What started as a conflict over Cuban independence ended really quickly, with the US basically snapping up Spain's last few colonies, places like Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Just like that, the old Spanish Empire that Columbus helped start was over, and a new American one was just getting started.
And if there's one person who just perfectly embodied this new, assertive America, it was President Theodore Roosevelt. Teddy. He was young, he was full of energy, and he absolutely believed in projecting American strength. And how do you do that? Well, for him, it meant building the US Navy into the second largest fleet in the entire world. And here's where you see this strategy in action. Roosevelt makes sure the US gets the rights to build the Panama Canal, which finally opens in 1914. This thing was an engineering marvel, and it let that powerful new American Navy zip back and forth between the Atlantic and the Pacific. It basically gave the US dominance over 2 oceans at once. So think about this. By the time World War I breaks out in Europe, that once ignored, kind of useless collection of colonies had become a true global power. It had a monster economy and a world-class military. The unexpected rise was complete. But that just led to the next big question. What was America going to do with all that power?